has a long and extensive biography. I don't think you have seen it in our announcement, but I would like to...
It's certainly long.
Anyway, so I would just like to point out a few of his professional incarnations. So there it goes. He's a senior editor with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. He's also a fellow at the Center of Media and Data Society and a visiting lecturer at the School of Public Policy at the Centralnoevropeiskия University of Budapest. Actually, Hungary is the place we're heading tonight, as you can see the topic of this presentation. In the next 30 minutes, I encourage you to think of provocative questions and to save them for the end of the presentation, because we are looking forward for a heated discussion. The working language is English, as you have noticed. I hope most of you, every one of you, are comfortable with this. And the floor is yes, we are having a small drink, wine drinking, after more about that.
Yes, the best for last. Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Can I have to do something? I want to thank the Association of European Journalists in Bulgaria for their hospitality and warm welcome to Sofia, which really took me by storm. I have an immediate crush on this city and can't wait to come back with my family. My wife's a sociologist and culture and historic preservation, and can't wait to show her some of the sites around here. I also want to thank the America for Bulgaria Foundation. I had a nice talk with Nancy Schiller today. They're doing great work, and they're a reminder of what the U.S. can do when it gets its policy right and has its head screwed on right. So it's been a great experience to be here. Tonight's going to be a bit of a, and I also want to thank everyone here for coming. Because you came on a Friday afternoon, evening, and because it's probably because you're concerned about journalism and you're concerned about democracy, and we're all here sharing the same concerns. We're all kind of on the same journey, and the idea is to share information. I think you can actually learn something from Hungary for reasons I'll explain, but it's not about some academic exercise. It's about knowledge that we can share and apply to stop playing defense and go on offense and defend democracy and a free press. So the reason we're talking about Hungary is not just because I happen to live there and I know something about it, although those are good reasons. But I can make a case that Hungary is sort of the point of the spear of the liberal tide that's been overtaking Western democracy since the financial crisis of 2008. Viktor Orban came to power, as we'll see, in 2010. And the thing I want to emphasize, if there's nothing else you take away from this talk tonight, is that the Orban story is a media story. His rise, the consolidation of his power, and the perpetuation of his power is built explicitly on media policy, media domination. It's not just an appendage to some other things that he had. In some ways, he's an innovator in a bad way, in media takeover, market domination, I think in ways that I haven't seen before. And he's also a copycat. He certainly borrowed some plays from Vladimir Putin's playbook, but I think he added some particular sophistication of his own. He was aided by the fact that Hungary, like Bulgaria, is a small market, which really makes it difficult for independent media to survive. And he's been copied by other regimes, and that's sort of where we're at. And so this is again my class night, and the people who came to both lectures get extra credit for sitting through two. So Galina and others who I can't remember their names, but I'm very grateful for them to show up. So let's talk about Hungary. The first thing I think I want to just to talk about is this overview that we know that journalism is under pressure in a lot of different ways. It has a lot of internal problems that it's trying to sort out. We dealt with a lot of those last night. The ones I'm going to, and we don't have to worry about those because we got other fish to fry. But the ones we're going to deal with are the sort of the top left corner there, where this sort of the last night's talk was called Global Challenges to Public Interest Journalism. You might want to call this talk Local Challenges, because this is where the state is using its power to suppress, legal economic power to suppress independent media. So that's sort of what we're sort of looking at. Not every element here is present in Bulgaria as it is in Hungary. We're not dealing with political violence yet, which is a good thing. Surveillance, we don't know that much, but yeah, probably are. Freedom of information is key, but we're not going to talk about that. But basically, we're looking at external challenges to journalism, basically by hostile governments. Okay. And again, just setting the sort of the framework here. Katrina Voltmers wrote about there's a lot of literature when the Cold War ended and a lot of countries were trying to establish democracies and how to set up a free media system, and I thought these were useful cornerstones of quote enabling environment for media independence. In this part of the world, freedom of information laws are actually more important than maybe even in the U.S. A lot of reporting comes from official sources that are released under freedom of information laws. Libel laws have to be fair and not used punitively against journalists. The regulatory structure is absolutely critical, particularly when you're talking about television and radio. And if you think TV and radio are media of the past, think again. I don't have the stats at my fingertips for Bulgaria, but most people get their news from TV. Most people get their, and it's hard for me to admit that as a print guy. So licensing is absolutely critical. And then the last bit is media economics and business model. There's a Latin American, I can't remember which, Argentinian, I can't remember what country from, Ricardo Gondor talks about this good phrase he calls the need for stable platforms of journalistic production. Stable platforms of journalistic production. Basically, it's a place where you can come to work and without having, having to, worry about losing your job the next day. And you're when you're talking about something like that, you're talking about newsrooms of scale. I am very admirative of these small startups where people out there against all odds, with a handful of people are out there performing investigative journalism. But democracy needs the press to have some power. Power to set the public agenda. So we're talking about large newsrooms of scale, and that's sort of what democracy requires. I showed a slide last night that compared the size of the New York Times company against Facebook, and literally, if you compared the market size of market capitalization, the value of the stock market places on those two companies, one would be up to that black lighting infrastructure, and the New York Times would be that little curve. I mean, there's no comparison between the size of the power, the financial power of the companies that companies and governments that news organizations are trying to cover. So whenever you hear somebody complain about media being too powerful, don't believe it. The public needs a strong media, strong press. So this is about market domination. It's a term I kind of coined. You might call it soft censorship. I think it's better. My phrase is better, indirect censorship. But this is the World Organization of Newspaper Publishers and Center for something or other. I can't remember. It's an international organization. They define what I'm talking about is any of an array of official actions intended to influence media output, short of legal or extra-legal bans, direct censorship of specific content, or physical attacks on media outlets or practitioners. So in Hungary, as I think in Bulgaria, you can fairly claim there's no censorship here. We've got a free press, right? And there's no violence against reporters. They're safe. Well, they can do their job. What's the problem? Well, the problem is what we're about to talk about. So a little snapshot of Hungary. I got to put my glasses on because I'm really filthy. Sorry, guys. So it's a country, it's a decent analog to Bulgaria, probably. It's a country about 9 million at this point. Bulgaria's a little smaller. Budapest has got, it's the bulk population that's in the urban center. It's very literate, 99% adult literacy. The incomes are really low, $13,000 a year. Probably similar here.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean that has implications for trying to support commercial media. People don't have a lot of disposable income. Doesn't mean you shouldn't subscribe, but I'm just saying. Mobile phones, everybody has more phones than people. Internet access, actually better penetration than the U.S. Corruption perception index, I don't know, for 54 is high, but if it's not high, then the number should be higher, because that's a very corrupt country. So it's a place that is a national market for quality news. Literate public, plugged in, ready to go. So who's Viktor Orban anyway? Right? He's an interesting story, and if he were, I guess the way I always put it is if Donald Trump were as effective as Viktor Orban, we'd all be in a hell of a lot of trouble. This is not an untalented politician. It's not a person who's unable to think strategically and over the long term. He also, I mean, I'm going to psychoanalyze him, but he's a guy who I think really believes that he should be prime minister and nobody else. Like he's born to that role. And I don't speak Hungarian, but I've heard him talk, and you see the, with translation, I see the body language. He inhabits the role. So it's a very sort of, in a lot of ways, like George W. Bush did. He really looked and felt like president, even though he was absolutely terrible, right, from a policy point of view. But you could kind of see why people. So he's from a small town, a village actually called Felső, not too far from Budapest. He didn't only live there, but I think that was it's where he lives now, his formative experience. I think the important thing to remember is he had, there's a kind of a very, like everywhere I guess, a sharp split between country and city, and resentment of urban elites or perceived urban elites, including and especially Budapest media, which he always felt were hostile to him. He formed a party called the Alliance of Young Democrats in the late 80s, before the fall of, he helped form it. He was just one of a bunch of, these were the cool young liberals of Budapest, of Hungary. They were the good guys. And they were going to reform, they were going to take over after, it was, they anticipated the fall of communism, and they were going to bring liberal democracy to Hungary. He made an important speech that kind of made his name as a college kid almost in 1989, right before the fall of the wall, and he called for free elections and the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Hungary, and was kind of greeted as it was hailed as a great triumph and super courageous and everything else and all that. The point, and he was, because he was so promising, George Soros funded him to go to Oxford. I think everyone kind of knows that and the irony of that, but he did, and he returned. He cut his studies short to run for the first free elections in Hungary the first free elections post-communism in 1990. Again, as head of Fidesz, which was, again, I know some of the people who were in Fidesz back then. This was a very, these were hardcore liberal people from Budapest, and it was a very dramatic shift in 93, 94, when essentially Orban decided to purge the party. And opportunistically, I think, it was not about like some revelation on the road to Damascus. It was an opportunity. He saw a political vacuum on the right of center, essentially purged the party of people I know are people who were purged by Orban back then. And I know one of the Peter Molnar said he told him at the time. He said, "But Victor, this is an amputation," and Orban said, "So be it." And so he made this dramatic move to the right. And for people forget that he was able to, again, a talented politician, and he was able to cobble together an election victory in 1998, and served as head of a coalition government at the age of 35, one of the youngest prime ministers in Hungarian history. But the important thing for our story is the fact that he lost in 2002 in what was a complete personal shock to him. This was came as a complete surprise, and something he vowed would never be repeated. And even during the first term, him and his allies, including a college friend turned businessman named Lajos Szemicka, who became his sort of right-hand man in the media business, they realized that they had they embarked on a program that they called media balancing. That is to say, creating alternative media to counter the perceived liberal bias of left-leaning bias of Budapest media. Well, when he lost in 2002, the main takeaway he had from that was that they had not gone nearly far enough in taking control of the media. I was going to hesitate because it's such an offensive term, but there was this. It reminds me of this anecdote about George Wallace, the segregationist governor from Alabama back in the 50s and 60s. He lost this election in 1958 to a guy who was a super racist who had the support of the Ku Klux Klan. And the quote is, and I hesitate to use it because it's such an offensive word, but George Wallace said to his aide, that his opponent out-niggered me, and I'm never going to get out-niggered again. And so he became this, he was a guy who was endorsed by civil rights group. He became, turned around completely, became a total segregationist, became one of the leading figures of the fight against civil rights. Well, I sort of feel like that's sort of how Orban felt. I'm never going to get out-mediated again. And he embarked on a very systematic, relentless program that has several steps that we'll go through. But the first step was to build an empire, right? It was to build his own media empire. And you know what? As liberal Democrats that we all are, we can't really object to that. I mean, that's how it works, right? You put your ideas out in there in the marketplace, and may the best ideas win. With Schmidt's he's this guy with the sunglasses on top of his head. But there's a bunch of straw men, oligarchs, and allies. He acquired one of the largest daily newspapers called Magyar Nemzet, Hungarian National, and a conservative weekly. That was in the 90s, and then in between 2002 and 2010, they spent a lot of time and a lot of money, slowly, methodically, putting together a portfolio of media assets. Here, television is a sort of CNN thing. Echo TV is a public affairs cable channel. Magyar Hírlap is another national daily, and began to acquire billboard companies. And the outdoor advertising business is very important in Hungary. That's probably here for political advertising. They also acquired one of only two national radio frequencies. So by the time there's more to Orban than media. The socialist government was quite wobbly, and by the time we got near the end of the decade, he had already acquired a fairly formidable portfolio of assets that would rival a lot of the, I guess what we would call mainstream media. And to be fair to Orban, even people who I think even some observers feel that when he won in 1998, the media was pretty hostile to him, and that they, and maybe be for good reason or whatever. But and also to be fair, I'm kind of used to this. At least in the U.S., we have this tradition, and you could challenge me on it or laugh at it or whatever. We have this tradition that we are nonpartisan and independent and not aligned with any political parties. And in Hungary, I think there's more of a tradition of partisan media and activist media and that type of thing with newspapers aligned with political parties and that kind of thing. But in any case, whether or not the Budapest media was left-leaning or centrist, he certainly created something that was going to make sure his own message was heard. So this is, before he gets elected in 2010. But we can't ever forget that, Wall Street has given us many gifts over the years. And one of them is this disaster of 2008, we call the global financial crisis, which has reverberated around the world. When I say gifts, I'm being ironic. I think Wall Street is extremely dangerous for us and needs to be very tightly regulated. But Orban, in a lot of ways, is only one consequence of it. I would also, you could probably argue that the Euro crisis was, the Brexit was, Trump was, all of this, to me, is part of this post-crisis world that I think we're still living in. If you ask, when I look at the world, basically I see everything before the crisis and everything after the crisis. And that's how I sort of interpret history. But in the case of Hungary, it was direct. Hungary, the Lehman bankruptcy was on September 15th, 2008. Essentially, Hungary declared bankruptcy and took over as the crisis hit their debt portfolio, which crashed, and they had to turn to the IMF for emergency funding. They were the first European country to have to do that. And when you turn to IMF, they're basically going to impose a severe austerity program on you to make sure that you pay them back. And that was one of the factors that led to Orban's victory in 2010. Also, don't forget that it wasn't just that the financial crisis devastated the global economy and put millions of people out of work, sparked a wave of foreclosures around the world and that kind of thing. It also was a body blow to the media industry. Media is extremely sensitive to economic change, and advertising is the first thing companies pull when sales go down. So there was a massive advertising crash, completely separate and apart from what Google and Facebook were doing or about to do in 2008. And many media properties, including in Hungary, were irreparably damaged by that crisis. So just sort of keep that in mind. So here's the Attila Báthofi is a scholar at our center who probably the last word on the Hungarian market. You sort of see that this is I mean, it's interesting to note that the total advertising, total media market in Hungary was about $1 billion before the crisis, and lost $200 million over that time. And in Hungary, that's a lot of money, and 20% of revenue is is basically a catastrophe. Yeah, same idea. So, so the first step was he accumulated this portfolio of media properties, and the second thing was he passed this media law of 2010. And it's kind of significant that it's called the media law of 2010 because this was not a law that was like thrown together at the last minute. This was a law, as they sort of say elsewhere, was meticulously prepared. This document that I'm showing on the screen is the English translation that includes rebuttals to criticism that had been broached about the law being introduced, but it runs to 186 pages. It is extremely detailed, so it's clear to me, and this was the very first piece of major legislation that Orban introduced. So when I say that the Orban story is a media story, I mean, it's like, I'm not kind of guessing. I mean, he himself probably would agree with me that, that media was the first thing he did. Before he attacked the courts, before he did anything else, apparently the anecdote goes that the only other law that was put on the table before the media law was a law allowing the home distillation of fruit brandy. And then this, in other words, this was by far the most important priority. So the media law is, was a centerpiece of their, was again the top priority of their legislative strategy. What it did was basically seize control by the government of the entire media system through something called the Media Council, which, nominally, and it was really, I mean, you have to read the law to kind of fully appreciate it, but it was definitely written in a way that the authors understood that this was going to be scrutinized by the European Union, and it and there were ways to, so all of the levers of control were sort of hidden in the details of the bill. So they created something called the Media Council, which is, on paper, looks like something like the Federal Communications Commission, except the only difference is the way the law is written, only members of the government can sit on this panel. This law, and even though there are separate structures, technically and formally for such functions as control over public broadcasting, control over media mergers. There's a competition authority that is formally in control of media mergers. But if you read closely the law, in fact, the Media Council has final say over mergers. Media Council has final say over licensing and complete control over public broadcasting. So this was and in fact, the law was so sweeping, it kind of claimed control over they're the ultimate arbiters of content. It was a very sort of bold law, and that was one of the first things that, in other words, it includes fines for vague infractions by the media I think I have a couple. Yeah, well, the fines are things like offending minority or offending certain groups in society, including the majority. You know, offenses against the dignity of the. In fact, they haven't really, and the fines were significant. You know, several hundred thousands of euros over. In fact, and that was and there was a huge outcry, if you recall, and pushback in Europe, the Council of Europe, and we're also. And in fact, it's not that the Media Council has acted as a censor, in fact, and imposed massive fines, but it was really symbolically a marker that there's a new sheriff in town, and we're going to be controlling the media. So, so that was sort of step one, the media law of 2010. And one of the things that it did was, again, it's all in the details. And it all has all these sweeping powers. So, and we're first, and then really, if that was the first thing we did, the second thing we did was seize control of the MTVA, which is so that's sort of step three. The MTVA is the Public Broadcasting Authority. And one of the ironies or tragedies of the Hungarian case was when they became a democracy in 1990, it wasn't a smooth transition. There was lots of arguments and dissent, but it was definitely one of the smoother transitions, and the laws they passed in the 90s were among the most progressive in Europe, and they were like far more progressive than a lot of the things in the United States. And one of the things that they did was because state broadcasting was so crude and manipulative during the communist era, they couldn't just deal. They couldn't allow. They didn't want to have just a single public broadcasting entity. They had three of them, and maybe they overdid it with they pluralized the public sector with three different broadcasting arms doing different types of things, radio, TV, and other things. And the first thing that, and for a while there was this kind of brief golden age of public broadcasting and technocrats and, academics were in charge, and everyone really should listen to public broadcasting for a while. It was very contentious, but the Orban bill, it did away with that, collapsed everything back under a single authority, and gave that basically this became this black hole. There's no transparency whatsoever. This is an agency that does not publish an annual report. all right? You have, and one of the things that's been kind of remarkable about it, in the U.S., you know, when you want to, you know, if you're a conservative, the first thing you do is you cut the budget for public broadcasting, because that's this horrible nest of liberals or whatever. Well, the first thing Orban did was he doubled the budget, right? So he doubled the budget because, and into this black hole, there's absolutely no financial accountability whatsoever. I think I say here, yeah, there was the authority took out a $200 million loan, and it was not disclosed. It was basically revealed by a investigative news site, and nobody sort of knew what it was for or what it was spent on. So they doubled the budget to almost 300 million euros a year, which is in Hungary is serious. You know, that's serious money. No one exactly sure who the beneficiaries are, but certainly it's definitely a way to reward government contractors, as well as to create this messaging system that has, and again, I don't speak Hungarian, but it's so clear that this essentially makes, you know, is a complete, basically everyone compares it to a throwback to the communist era. And they kind of can't believe that that's what they're looking at. And I'll try to, you know, there have been studies that have tried to kind of convey how bad it is. But it's basically all about, it's all about, if you turn on public TV, it's state TV at this point, it's all about immigrants and immigration. And this was a study that an NGO did. I don't know if you can see it that great, but I'm going to try and just point out a couple things. It's hard for me actually to see too, but so the, I always have trouble with sometimes. Sorry guys. Fine print. So, right. On the upper, the first, but I have to do this because it's kind of unbelievable. Oh, thanks. That's great. Yes, thank you. Hello. Great. Does this work?
Yes.
Great. Yeah. So the M1 is the public broadcasting station, and this is the amount of, and RTL Club is the, you could call that the control group. It's the major commercial station owned by a foreign company, Bertelsmann, that essentially is it's the most popular station in Hungary, and this shows, the first one shows that M1 led off its, had included its news coverage, immigration coverage, 84% of the time, and 43% is the first story. If you look at RTL Club, it basically led with immigration coverage 5% of the time. And even an ally of Orban, TV2, which is owned by Andy Vajna, a oligarch who used to be a big Hollywood producer, in fact, who was a really close ally of Orban. Even he only was running these pieces 12% of the time. I mean, this was blanket, wall-to-wall coverage about immigration and you know, black and brown people coming to. Right. So and this whether it was positive or negative coverage. And it shows here that 91% of the coverage was negative. And it's kind of like you have to sort of see it, apparently, to believe how relentless this propaganda is. We'll have a little evidence of its effect a little bit later. And RTL Club, you know, they portray immigrants in a negative light only 42% of the time, and most coverage on TV2 was negative too. But anyway, I mean, you shouldn't see. I mean, and RTL is, you know, is basically professional broadcasting. There's other kind of cool stats here which I actually can't read, and that's really annoying. So reporting has really revealed the extent to which the public broadcasting, but it's not just public, it's also the government-aligned papers and new reporting has showed that basically the messaging is coming straight out of the Prime Minister's office. And this was a friend of mine had this scoop that you know, that you're not supposed to show refugee children. And there's all sorts of directives like that, and how to refer. But it goes beyond migrants. It's like how to refer to my university, Central Europe University, has to be called Soros University. All that kind of stuff. All these talking points are distributed from the. So can anyone? This is a representation of the top thing is state media, and the other is the actual reality. But can anyone sort of figure out what this is? The number of migrants who cross the border illegally into Hungary. You see the problem? They both show the number 235 people. But you notice the scale on the left is eliminated from the first one, and this is sort of the kind of crude messaging we're talking about. That 235 just got a lot taller relative to 129. I mean, it's just that's sort of where it's at. So that's the seizure of control and it's kind of interesting, and one of the reasons I kind of had hope for the world is that despite the massive increases in budgeting by Orban, state TV remains this dismal ratings flop. You know, nobody watches it. I mean, it has 20% market share, whereas RTL Club is dominant. You know, it's got 80% of the market or something like that, and TV, you know, can't understand, but. You know, and that sort of gave me some sort of hope, but there actually is and you kind of have to live there to fully appreciate it, but it's not just, even if you just live there and driving along. I have this video, I was coming up the escalator, one of the metro stations, and they have really long escalators there. For some reason, they have to dig really deep. And the entire thing was this say no to Brussels. Like, I mean, it was 300 yards long of a poster that was taped next to the elevator, you know, between the escalators. I mean, and if you drive from the airport, I mean, this is. I mean, I have photos. I didn't include them, but it's just this kind of blue wave of, you know, Soros. I mean, it's sort of everywhere, and you kind of laugh it off, but that's sort of like this. That's been this kind of media has been again very, very. They had a very, very defined strategy about what they were doing, and they did execute. So step 4 is the money hose. The money hose is. In a state like Hungary and a state like Bulgaria, the state is a huge player in the media market. That's something new to me. That's new to me. Because in the US is a massive media market. The commercial piece is overwhelmingly large. In places like Hungary, not only is the government the biggest, a big player, it is the biggest single advertiser in media in the country. All right. So, and how does it does it through agencies like the lottery and BKK, the transit system, and the Hungarian National Bank. Now, why the Hungarian National Bank has to advertise, or why the transit system, which has no competition, has to advertise, is another question entirely. But it's basically a way of indirect subsidy, or basically direct subsidies to media. And you know, there's no, one of the things that Orban is sure to do, one of the things that kind of blows my mind really is there's no kind of, there's zero financial accountability at all in Hungary. So you'll see it how there's, you know, it's not like there's anybody's bidding for these dollars. So what Orban has done is basically directed billions of forints of state advertising to his friends. And this first graphic shows state spending to RTL Club and a TV station owned by a Orban rival, and you sort of see right as soon as he's elected, RTL Club's share of state spending just falls through the floor, and the rival. And the other thing is that he also, this doesn't really do justice to it, but you'll notice that the share of public spending versus the commercial market has really jumped. It's hard to, this doesn't quite fully capture, but it's a massive increase in public spending on media. In fact, the collapse that was experienced in the commercial market in the private market by the financial crisis is almost made up by this increase in state spending. And so these are the, you know, the advertisers are, as I say, it's like the Hungarian National Bank, the National Lottery, the Prime Minister's office directly, the Hungarian Postal Service. You know, these are sort of, these are the kind of the sources of this funders. And you'll see that, you know, it's the government, Magyar Nemzet, for instance, which is a government-allied paper, like the share of its revenue it got from the state is 44%. Yeah, this was like, these are basically hothouse flowers that only exist, all of the media properties only exist because they are subsidized by the state. So one of the things that you do is you know, if you're going to take over your media system, is you reward your friends and cut off your enemies. And to be sort of, I guess not fair, just to give some context, nobody said that the socialists were angels, right? But in the old days meaning the time after the fall of communism and before Fidesz, they kind of divided up the pie, you know. So you sort of see, I think there's a graphic that shows it, but you'll see that, like, you know, the socialist paper, Nick Savichov got 60% of it, or, you know, they split it 60-40, and that's how those were the norms of the day. And like, for me, you can't run a country that way. If you're going to spend money for the transportation system, it should benefit the transportation. It shouldn't be about media. But what Orban did is basically like throw that out the window, and it's like winner take all. So we're going to just take the whole thing, and you get nothing. And that's sort of like this is like this kind of Trumpian, early Trumpian, like winner take all sort of scenario where, you know, not just, you know, scratch each other's back and go like, I'll take my 60, you get your 40. It's like we have to destroy you entirely. So this shows like the complete corruption in the media ad buying system. It's a little complicated, but it's worth explaining. The red is spending on on newspapers owned by Orban's ally, this guy Šimitska. He was his college roommate who owned most of the media properties under Orban. Except in February of 2015, they had this very ugly public falling out, and Šimitska said, called Orban in public, did like, after never talking to the press ever, he gave like interviews like all day, some certain days, like they call it G Day, because he called Orban some profanity that starts with G that I can't even remember. It refers to whatever. It's a family presentation, so I'm not going to repeat it. But it's called G Day. That's how important this was, the split between Orban and Šimitska. But you sort of see that the minute G Day happens, right, all of the public spending on that's the second green line. All of the public spending on Šimitska's properties like completely declines, and the blue is the leftist or the non-government stuff, so it never wasn't affected. But it just sort of shows like this is where I'm from, public contracting is pretty sacred. You don't play with for political purposes. And if you do, you're supposed to go to prison. But it just shows basically how completely manipulated this is, and that's why I kind of call it the fire hose. It's like you just spray the money at your friends, and that's sort of the way it goes. And a couple of scholars did this very interesting paper called Media Capture Through Favor Exchange, and they were the ones who did all these graphics, sort of showing how public spending on media in Hungary was manipulated. Two Hungarian guys who are now studying in the US, of course, because they can't work in Hungary. But what this shows is, and again, it's kind of worth walking through. The graphic you're looking at is about coverage of corruption scandals in different newspapers. Okay, so that's the main thing. And the left-wing daily is Nép Szabadság, which is, let's use that as kind of the control thing. They're trying to play it straight, and they're covering scandals as they come, right? And so you'll notice that the blue line is like when scandals, like something bad happens, it's not necessarily investigative reporting, but it's basically just reporting bad things that are happening to the Orban government. It kind of, it goes up and down with the flow of the news, but as long as Orban's ally is in control and they're friends and they're getting state money, there's almost no coverage of a political scandal in the red line. See what I'm saying? See what's going on? And basically what they're arguing is that Orban is buying the silence of the friendly papers, and as soon as the money is cut off, Šimitska turns his reporters loose, and their coverage of scandals basically matches what Nép Szabadság is doing. So it's basically showing how the system works. Like, I'll pay you money, and you just don't report anything bad about me. I mean, basically proves it. And here's a slide from Batofi. Again, these take a little bit of minutes to unwind, but the orange the big orange bubble is Orban comes to power, and basically the percentage of state spending to Orban ally Šimitska goes, basically dominates the entire thing, and then it kind of drops off. So I guess that's that was step 4. So step 4 is seize the apparatus of media funding and turn the flow to your friends and cut off your enemies. And so far, that's all bad enough. Mostly because of the misuse of public funds. I mean, public funds shouldn't even be. If you want to subsidize newspapers, you should do that, but not through the lottery or through the transit system. Okay, step 5 is, and I should say sort of like, I mean, one of the sort of overarching themes of the Orban story is, it had like, it's not quite in my 5-step story, but it really did have two elements. One was this sort of legalistic strategy, and then this, and you know, the fact is, I don't know if, do you remember the controversy about the media law? Did that make it here? Because it was a thing in Hungary, and it was like a thing in Brussels, but it was, maybe it didn't go. It was a big pushback in Europe from that, and it was kind of that, you know, it was a hassle, and it was controversial, and Orban had to defend it and stuff like that. My sense was that later on he decided that the legal stuff was, you know, that using market power was much more effective and much harder to put anybody's fingerprints on than the straight legislative approach. So the economic power became kind of important. However, he also did use legal mechanisms to attack independent media. One was competition authority. He basically used that to drive out foreign ownership. I mean, when I always think of foreign ownership, I think that's like this colonial story where, you know, bad Swiss or the bad Germans come in and profit over people's media. But you realize in a lot of cases, foreign ownership means independent ownership. They don't really care that much about whether the government likes them or not, which is, they're not dependent on the Orban government, which is, you know, you want that, right? You want some elements of that. So one of the first things that they did when they came in was block a merger of Ringier and Axel Springer, which used to have big presences in Hungary, and kind of held them up for 4 years, right? And they controlled big chunks of, they owned named Savachuk, for instance, and they wanted to control, and they controlled big chunks of the local media system, which is actually rather important in Hungary. So they blocked that merger, and they were sort of in limbo for a while. We'll get to why. Then they passed this advertising tax that basically had one target, which is RTL Club. RTL Club is a, they had a pretty independent newsroom and was doing, hard-hitting investigative stories about the Orban government. Orban government came up with something called the advertising tax. It basically was targeted like only companies over 500 million euros. There's only one company who was going to have to pay for it. And RTL Club made, Bertelsmann's a big company, they fought back. And it was kind of resolved, but, and it's never been reported and it's not really proved, but it's clear that one of the things that the government got in return for pulling back on the tax and leveling it more evenly around the media system was that RTL Club disbanded its investigative team. So, I mean, when you sort of think about media and journalism, and I've said this the other day in a piece, it's like, if you ever doubt the importance of journalism, in sort of public discourse, I can guarantee you that Viktor Orban never doubted the importance of journalism, never. It's always first and foremost in his mind. The second thing he did was blow up Origo. Origo was basically the business news site, but it was a big site. It was the biggest site in Hungary, and it was good stuff. And a friend of mine worked there, and he wrote these stories about lavish spending on foreign trips by the head of Orban's cabinet, his close buddy. And soon after that, those stories were published. The company that owns Origo fired the editor, Gergos Schelling. The staff walked out. There was this massive demonstration that you sort of see pictured up there. Origo was owned by Magyar Telekom, which was owned by Deutsche Telekom, one majority owned by Deutsche Telekom. Deutsche Telekom was doing all sorts of deals in the Hungarian countryside. No one ever smoked out the exact reason, but it was clear that that was a sort of political dismissal. So that's what you also do. You sort of apply a regulatory tax. You use tax and regulatory message. And my brief reading of the Bulgarian situation is that that's exactly what happens here. abuse of the tax authority. And you sort of see here, thanks to Attila, that the yellow part of that's revenues and lower. I'm not sure what CNT actually means, but revenues, the lower three. The amount of revenue that foreign ownership yield, one has shrunk dramatically, and yeah, I guess the local ownership is now dominant, and local ownership basically means people who are beholden to or dependent on Orban. The thing about, you have to kind of also realize in a market this size, a market Bulgaria's size, is that even though the government's a big direct spender, it also has a huge influence over the private market, because almost every business, particularly large business, has some kind of dealings with the government, needs the government for something, a license or a contract or something. So it's very it's very difficult to ask a private corporation to advertise in an independent news organization that's viewed unfavorably by the government. So they have a huge influence over scaring away advertisers. The advertising market's basically closed to independent media. This is a big problem. Okay, and then step 6, or wherever we are, is you shut down. Again, you got to shut down independent journalism institutions. So Nép Szabadság is this paper that had been around since the communist time. It was actually the official organ of the state. It had a checkered history. It wasn't like it was like a Washington Post thing or whatever. However, it did have its ups and downs, but it was after the communist era, it was only minority owned by the party and had nothing really to do with them. They were owned by Ringier or Axel, one of those things held up in this merger combination. And let's see what happened. So finally, after 4 years, in 2014, this media council, competition council, approves the merger, but requires Ringier and Axel to sell most of their local papers and Nép Szabadság to a company based in Vienna that was basically a proxy for a Hungarian oligarch named Zoltán Spader, a banker. So, so now these organs are out of foreign hands and into Hungarian hands. Well, I mean, it's an interesting story that, and here's sort of the timeline, which I'll walk through. But for whatever reason, no one really knows why. Well, Nép Szabadság hires these really, top editors and crackerjack reporters, and the fact is, Hungary has, like Bulgaria, has some real serious journalistic talent there, and they're when they're given a chance, they do amazing work, and they go on this string of scoops about Orban and his family and his allies and his businesses and his father and his brother, and particularly Orban's son-in-law, István Tiborcs, the husband of his daughter, Rachel, and basically getting all these government contracts, and these are really hard-hitting stories. And even though RTL Club doesn't have an investigative unit, they still are able to report what other people are reporting. And this kind of alternative narrative starts to take hold in the Hungarian media system, that maybe the whole public discourse isn't all about immigration after all. Maybe it's also about public corruption. So I mean, this was sort of like a murder mystery, because it was what you call the perfect crime, because so this is the spring, the 2015 through the spring of 2016. So in the spring of 2016, Zoltan Spader is raided by the police. I don't know if he went to prison, but he's certainly, you know, gone from the picture. He's raided. He's forced to sell his bank. And all of a sudden, MediaWorks starts to hire people that with close ties. The parent of Dave Savicek with close ties to the government. The editor-in-chief starts hearing rumors like immediately, like you're a goner, you know, you should, you know, whatever, get out now or whatever. And he goes up to the editor goes up to the Viennese guy who owns it, a guy named Heinrich Pacina, and says, what's going on? Are we going to be sold? He said, no, absolutely not. We're going to be, you're in great shape. In fact, we're acquiring a string of local papers, and we're expanding. So he goes back to work. And the next thing he learns, and this is that the reporters show up to work. I think it's, yeah. Oh, right, so on September 30th, in record time, the competition authority, after like deliberating for a single month, remember it took 4 years for them to decide the other thing. In the single month, they approve a merger of the purchase by MediaWorks of a string of local papers. And then immediately what Pacina does is so this bang bang move, he closes Nape Savicek, sells the entire local portfolio to an ally of the government, and MediaWorks becomes basically government-aligned property. This is important, and so one day on October 8th, everyone at Nape Savicek shows up to work one day, and the doors are locked. And Pacina argued, and the government said, well, yeah, nothing to do with us, right? And Pacina argued that it was an economic reason. We were losing a lot of money with other things. But in fact, you know, internal documents show that in fact they weren't losing money. But the other thing is the whole idea that you would immediately shutter a newspaper because of losses is sort of preposterous, because there's value there. They did not even try to put it up for auction, and the workers themselves were ready to buy the paper. It was not for sale. So this was a political move, but shut down not just the biggest opposition paper, but Nape Savicek was the biggest daily paper in Hungary. And so that was a big blow, and it was sort of like a formative moment for the media system. Now there are media that do remain. We'll get to that, but anyway, so somebody did this kind of tried to graphically represent how it was a system that included, you know, basically Index, Origo, big news portals, RTL mentioned public broadcasting, TV2 was, you know, as a commercial channel that was basically did crime news and stuff, but it was independent. And then here's sort of where it kind of goes. And Attila, you know, showed that, you know, basically most of the profits in the media system go to just a handful of news organizations, tabloids, billboards, the commercial TV stations, and government-allied papers. So if you look at the sort of media system today, and this is sort of so political weeklies are orange is all Fidesz. So these are so this is sort of the extent to which the weekly market and the news portals. Index is still running. It's apparently hanging by a thread. No one's even exactly sure who owns Index, and it's not sure that that's going to survive very long, but the blue part is basically Index and a couple of other properties. Radio channels are dominant. There's one sort of independent national radio channel that's still in the hands of the owners that acquired it before the Fidesz government took power. The TV news is RTL Club is probably like 45% there. They're still there, and we don't, you know, I don't, maybe they'll be there. This is the dailies, and I can't imagine. This must be pre-Nate Savichuk, because I don't know who would be that 26% at this point. And here's the important thing: is the daily regional newspapers. These are local papers. And so somebody did a study of these local papers that are all controlled by Fidesz allied businesses. And they noticed that all these local papers are running the exact same story all the time. So these are different, you notice these are different titles. So these are the home pages of all these local papers. So, so there's like a clip, I'm kind of wrapping this up. There's a clip I wanted to show because it's if you don't mind sitting through a few minutes, 3 minutes of this. It's a thing that kind of got everybody's attention. It was Index did it, and it ran in the fall of 2017. And you know, all of the media domination, the market domination things that I talk about are kind of, at that point, kind of had been in place for a little while. But nobody really knew whether or not this was the strategy was, you know, would anybody believe this? And I kind of had this naive idea that countries that had lived under communist rule, the population had kind of grown sophisticated to state official pronouncements, and were able to discount and you know, read between the lines of official, basically, propaganda. That might have been naive on my part. So let's watch 3 minutes of this. This is about, well, he'll explain, but it's about this incident. It happened in the summer of 2017 when some guest house guy, you know, a nice liberal guy with some, you know, open eye, decided he would invite 15 women and children who were in who were already screened by the government in these refugee camps, to come to Lake Balaton to spend 2 weeks, kind of not being in a prison camp, basically. And here's what happened.
Bőcsény egy 2300 fős kisközség volt.
Oh, sorry.
Ez a település akkor lett egy...
It's not switching over. I see it, but it's not. No? How about this? Do we have any text on? No? What was that gentleman who was, might be worth our trouble?
Try Xing out of the
Close out PowerPoint?
yeah.
Let's try it. Yeah, okay, we're good. Thanks. Watch 3 minutes and then we'll. It made an impact, actually.
Őcsény egy 2300 fős kisközség Tolna megyében. Ez a település akkor lett egyszerűen országosan ismert, amikor egy panziós elhatározta, hogy menekülteket üdültetne itt a faluban. Az emberek egymás ellen fordultak, a polgármester éppen lemondani készül, és csak erről van szó itt az utcákon.
A világon mi megy? Csak a terrortámadás még ezek vannak. Mit válaszolunk? Semmi jót.
Megerőszakolják a nőket, például rabolnak, gyilkolnak.
Tehát a bűncselekményeket követnek el, boltoznak, rabolnak, lopnak, csalnak, hazudnak.
A betegségektől féltek inkább, amiket hoznak maguk után, mert ugye már nincs semmilyen oltásuk, semmi.
Azok kicsi korában megfogtak azok.
Nem ismerik a törvényeket. Saját törvényeknek szerintem meg nincs.
Molesztálják a gyerekeket meg mindennel, szerintem nem vagyunk rá kíváncsiak.
A polgármester azt mondja, hogy azért mond le, mert hogy a falut annyira megosztotta ez a téma, hogy ő már azt látja, hogy ez a falu nem ugyanaz, mint előtte volt. Ön is érzi, hogy a falu megosztott?
Szerintem ez egyáltalán nem osztotta meg a falut, mert a falunak a 99%-a biztos azt akarta, hogy senki ne jöjjön ide.
Semmi bajom nincsen a migránsokkal, mert ha azt vesszük, Magyarországon, akik tőlünk kim vannak dolgozni külföldön, ugyanolyan migránsok. A normális ember miért ne jöhetne?
Azt mondja az Úr Jézus, hogy ne ítélj, hogy ne ítéltes. Senkit nem szabad addig elítélni, még nem ismerjük meg az embereket, hiszen emberek vagyunk. Itt az országban is vannak rossz emberek, jó emberek.
I love that. There's always, people who kind of see through it, and that sort of, and you'll sort of see that they're the ones who see through it, kind of know where this is coming from too.
A tévében hallottuk, hát ez meg mindenhonnan már évek óta.
Megértem a népet, amikor ezt mutassák a híradóban, meg minden nap mutassák őket, meg minden. Persze, hogy félnek. Ki nem félnek.
Szerintem ez az állandó generálás, amit föntről, újságban, meg tévében, mindenhonnan, amit elkezdte a kormánynak föntről. Szerintem ez.
Tévét kell nézni, ennyi. Most lehet nem ők a gond hirtelen, velük van a gond, annak utána jönnek, azzal lesznek a gondok, aztán.
Kik jöttek volna a faluba, azt tudja?
Ja, konkrétan nem tudom, csak úgy, hogy egyszerűen migránsok.
Menjetek innen a picsába a faluból.
Voltak itt egyébként a faluban menekültek?
Nem tudok róla.
Elvileg csak nők és gyermekek lettek volna elszállásból nyaralni.
Ezek az emberek nem azért menekülnek onnan, mert ők el akarják hagyni az otthonokat, a családjukat, meg mindent az élet egy világon, hanem azért, mert mentik az életüket.
Ők lehet, hogy gyerekek meg ügyelekedtek, vagy gyerekek meg nők, de a villámváli víz, én azt mondom maguknak, az ördög nem azt karikások a szemek, ennyi.
A panziósnak volt egy autója, és által kiszúrkodták a kerekét.
Az emberek próbálnak valahogy tiltakozni, másképp nem megy, szép szóval, akkor próbálnak valami máshoz hozzányúlni.
Kik csinálták, és miért?
Valószínűleg azok, akik ellene vannak ennek az ügynek.
Figyeljétek, akkor majd megtudják, hogy mi az, hogy magyar Isten. Vagy ugyan, ha az ő törvényüket tiszteljük, én betartom az ő törvényüket, akkor egy sem van belőle.
Hiszen ez magának szúrta ki a kerekét, hogy benne legyen a tévében, a médiában szerepeljen.
Én lányom, de először még egy közösen. Már az is kérdezték, egyik sem. Először még a lányomat, mert azt megtanulnám, pikpat, bárkit megtanul.
Ez egy nyugodt falu volt. Eddig, ha idejönnek a migránsok, nem lesz nyugodt falu. És nem tudom, hogy ilyen gyűlölködött környezetben, hogy fognak tudni a migránsok nyugodtan tűnelni.
Miért kellett volna idejönni a faluba a migránsoknak?
Ez üzletpolitika. Szerintem ez az üzletember.
We get the point, and and I show that mostly because it kind of was a wake-up call to those of us living in the media bubble of Budapest. It was just the fall of 2017 that this kind of wall-to-wall stuff actually seemed to be working. You kind of heard like verbal testimony, yeah, I saw it on TV. Anyway, not to sort of be overly dramatic about it, but this was sort of the result of the elections of April 8th. And, this is kind of an exaggerated picture of the outcome. In fact, half the country did not vote for Fidesz, but the way the representation system works, they dominate more than about 2/3 of the parliamentary seats. So hence this kind of representation. So you know, in summary, right? I'm a journalist. I always assumed that what we did was important. Viktor Orban only confirmed it to me in spades that it's very important about what about having a healthy and vibrant, pluralistic media system. It's one thing to create your own sort of partisan messaging operation, portfolio of assets that you can use to propagate whatever message you want to get out. It's another thing also, though, to destroy public broadcasting, which is a public good and should serve everybody, to loot public treasure in support of your enterprise. But probably the worst thing of all is to actually destroy institutions of fact generation and news gathering that could at least provide an alternative to the government system. It's a bleak way to end this thing. It's not quite as bad as this slide appears, but that's sort of, I think, the playbook for how Orban took over a big portion of the media system, and through that, the Hungarian state. Thanks for listening. I think you all deserve a drink at this point. So I'm happy to answer questions or not, you know, it's I went on for. So perhaps it's I blew through everyone's question time, but I'm happy to sit here as long as you want.
Is the state capture now more complete than let's say 2 years ago? Or
is it more complete than it is 2 years ago? Yes, yes. That's easy. That I can say that pretty definitively, because the loss of Nate Savicek was a big blow. That came in 2016. So yeah, that was a newsroom of 70 people. You know, that can really have an impact. And beyond that, what was important about Nate Savicek was that it actually was a print product. You know, so it wasn't just kids, you know, that we were watching, but also it circulated throughout Hungary. Now, the circulation was small, 38,000, but it was the largest paper in Hungary. So it wasn't just Budapest elites who were reading it. We had a dedicated readership throughout Hungary. To me, that's critically important. You know, if you're going to be publishing, you don't want just, you just don't want your friends and so family to be reading what you write. You want your parents and your parents' friends and people out in the country to sort of be also reading it. So that was a big blow, and yeah, it's definitely Orban's more dominant today than he was 2 years ago. What happens 2 years from now is I don't know, but that's clear.
How about this control of elections? Is it is it more likely now that it gets overthrown on elections versus years ago?
Well, you know, the outcome was actually was an unpleasant and negative shock to people who were hoping for a different result, and because it doesn't feel like it feels like his support is much more fragile than this slide would indicate. In fact, half the country did not vote for him. in fact, there are serious, the media system is, of course, a big disadvantage to anybody trying to run against it, but also because of legal. Yeah, and I don't know enough about the electoral system, but it encourages the proliferation of smaller parties, and it discourages them. They were unable to get together to unify behind a single candidate. There's some feeling among some of us that a unified candidate would be a huge risk to Orban, and he did everything in his power to make sure that didn't happen. The opposition has a long road to go. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, this election was such a shock that some people think that it may have helped to change the political culture among the opposition. We'll see. Yes.
In the video, we kind of learned that obviously not everyone is buying the stories that are being fed to them, and so I'm wondering a couple of things. What kind of power does alternative media have, even though obviously it's small based on your examples? And how persuasive are the messages that people are hearing? I mean, I wonder this on a personal level when I hear messages that are, from to me from certain American media.
Right.
I think to myself that I'm not going to be persuaded by such stories, but really, how effective are they? Are they able to control public opinion?
So do people listen to the few remaining independent media sites that exist? The problem is to me seems to be scale. The investigative sites are both still too small. They're my friends, and they're heroes. Really, they're kind of holding the line against, and we'll see how long. Well, we'll see. But one thing that is a concern is whether, are they reaching people outside of Budapest, Budapest liberals, so I don't know. I don't know that people outside the capital are even getting the message, and that was why the takeover of the local papers was considered to be such a, again, if you're interested in dominating a media market, and you know something about Hungary, which I didn't, I wouldn't have thought that the local papers were so important. Local papers have bigger circulation combined than anything else. So, the question is, to me, what's needed is a news organization of scale that can distribute across the country, and ideally it would be a print product because some people still use it, but I think yes, I think people are open to alternative narratives, and like those people in that small town, they are, they're able to kind of, I think, in the marketplace of ideas, are able to figure out, basically who's telling the truth. The trouble is there isn't a marketplace of ideas. And when I thought about the example of life under communist rule, and people being savvier than seeing through some of the messaging that the party was providing, you have to remember that there was Voice of America and Radio Free Europe that did, and BBC, that did provide an alternative set of facts, and I think those organizations are sort of fondly remembered here for the role they played in sort of penetrating the media space. So, the question is, is the task really for all of us as people who care about these issues is to make sure that people have access to information that's alternative to the government message. Sure.
Could you tell us more about the funding of the independent Hungarian media channels which sometimes shut down? How are they funded? Because I think in Bulgaria we have a very interesting case that I don't think that we actually have independent media as such, because it's either owned by very controversial businesses.
Right.
Or not only. Or they're funded through grants by external foreign foundations. And this reduces the credibility that people have in their materials, even though they're very high-quality journalistic research. But so I'm interested to know more about the funding of Hungarian.
Yeah, great question. They rest on 3 pillars. One is crowdfunding, and it's become a very important source of income for the independent media outlets. I'm talking about investigative sites. Index is actually advertising driven. Somehow, because it's Hungarian, because it's large, I think we get 1 million visitors a month, it's able to generate enough revenue to run a newsroom. It's actually pretty big, and apparently, not bad, pretty good. But the investigative sites have 3 sources. One is crowdfunding. It's very, pretty successful. People give $40 a year. The second is this very cool mechanism that Hungary passed in the 90s that I'm actually writing about as a model for the U.S., which was called the 1% checkoff, and it was passed. Had nothing to do with media, but it was passed in the '96. Again, a very progressive ideas, and a lot of cool things going on in Hungary in the 90s, and people remember that period really fondly, and it's really kind of heartbreaking to talk to them about it. But this law allows taxpayers to check a box at the bottom or to fill out a form that sends 1% of their tax payment to an NGO of their choice. And originally it was about charities, the local charities essentially, animal shelters and orphanages or hospitals and that kind of thing. But a couple of news organizations have, and it required you to be a foundation or an association formally under Hungarian law, which is not always that easy. But a couple of news organizations have fashioned themselves as NGOs, as associations, and that has become a significant pillar of foreign investment. So a third of the funding maybe comes from the 1% law. And the beauty of that is, it's hard for the government to tamper with that. And B, it's controlled by taxpayers individually, so it's almost like a market choice. You can check off your 1% for some horrible news site, or you can check it off for some good one. It's up to you. And so it's not under anybody's control. So that's another thing. And the third pillar is the Open Society Foundation. And yeah, it's not ideal, but it's tough. It's what we got right now. And whether or not the government uses that to discredit the organization, let them. But the important thing I think for us as citizens is the larger the crowdfunding or local support, the stronger the argument the organization becomes, both in the sense of the money that they have, but also in the credibility they have in the public sphere. That's what the publisher was telling me. It's like when people check the 1% box, or they give us we can basically say that we're a local organization supported by local people, and that's important. So if you're ever considering, whether or not to subscribe to Capital or some of the other, you should probably consider doing it, just because it's just a vote of confidence. It's one of the things you can actually do to help promote journalism and democracy in your region, and tell your folks too, and your friends too, and they should they should themselves do a better job of mobilizing public support. Because there's a lot of people who, you know, want quality news and are willing to pay for it. So it's late. Everyone should go have a drink and go home. Yeah, please. No, I'm not trying to get out of here. I'm just trying to get out. I don't want to keep everyone too long.
What is the media story behind Trump? Is there a common?
That's my next lecture. Yeah, it's central to Trump's victory, central to his message. He was able to capitalize on a 40-year campaign of conservatives that were trying to take independent media in the U.S. as part of the liberal elites of the East Coast who hates rural people or white people or whatever the argument was. And, you know, Trump amped that up to turn that argument up to 11 on the dial, and basically said the media is the enemy of the American people, and made media, you know, the central focus, both by generating resentment and bitter, you know, tapping into this resentment of perceived bias about, or yeah, just this cultural war of country versus city and elites versus, you know. But somehow, working reporters got to be elites, and people who barely can pay their mortgage, and people like Donald Trump are like avatars of the working class. I don't know how that happened, but he was able to make the media a central part of his message, and at the same time, he has a knack for dominating media coverage, and coverage of Trump far exceeded coverage of Clinton. A lot of it was negative, but the point was that everyone was talking about him and not her. There was a study that we went into last night that showed basically how alternative right-wing media system was able to impose its agenda on the general public. And this election of 2016 was fought over email servers and immigration, two complete non-issues, you know, in the United States. I have to get into it, but this non-scandal about Hillary Clinton having an email server that was not a government, you know, non-governmental email, so that matter's worth a damn. And immigration, which, you know, frankly is it's like an Hungary, it's just a non-issue. If you really, you know, I mean, I'm the grandson of immigrants, which is fine. I mean, I like immigrants, but I would be open to arguments about immigration being this, you know, issue that would dominate an election if someone could show me what the problem was. But they couldn't. But if you look at the data from last night, the discussion of immigration in 2016 eclipsed that of like everything else, including the economy, and that was a complete confection made from ingredients whipped together by Donald Trump and the right-wing media system. Great questions. Thanks, everyone.